So, welcome everyone to this data design deep dive. For the agenda today is who am I? Workflow refresher. So, if there has been a while since you saw our basics, or if you haven't attended that as well previously, then I will go through the workflow really quickly. And then the main part of this session will be focused on the next 2 points, which is designing good data in AVO and our recommendations and best practices. So the designing good data part in AVO is about all the configurations that you can do to events, properties, to sources, destinations, all of these things that we did not cover in AVO Basics. So it's kind of an advanced data design course. And then we will also go through some recommendations and best practices, and these are totally independent of AVO. So they can be used in kind of any context. So if you are not a customer of AVO, this should be helpful for you as well. And then also I will mention our upcoming training sessions. So who am I? For those of you that don't know me, my name is Thora. I have a background in product analytics, been working in product analytics since the beginning of the year 2014. And I joined AVO almost 3 years ago, and I was like a really early employee there, or am a really early employee there, and have been with them for almost 3 years, like I mentioned. And I'm focusing on things like customer success, solutions architecture, and helping both our customers and those that are thinking about becoming customers to get to know AVO and figure out if it's a fit for them. So yeah, workflow refresher. So this is a kind of summary of the workflow in AVO. So I'm just going to run through this really quickly, just as a reference of kind of the day-to-day workflow on how teams work together using AVO. So the first thing that happens is that teams decide, okay, we're going to change this in our product, we're going to add this feature, or we're going to change this feature. And that is usually documented in a tool like Jira or Asana, or maybe just Slack or GitHub or whatever teams are using. And then when they are starting to figure out kind of how they want to measure success, then if they're using AVO, then that's the next step to use. So, so the first thing that happens in AVO is you create a branch like you would do in GitHub. You define your metrics and your event structures with your properties and constraints and all of that. Define that in AVO, and that's usually done by a product person or perhaps a data person, or even developers, they do that. But usually it's like a product or a data person that does that. Then the next step is to get feedback and request implementation. And you can get feedback and use kind of these review workflows that AVO provides, and approval workflows as well. So the conversation happens with kind of in context of the changes that are made in AVO on that branch. And request implementation. So you can copy these implementation instructions and paste them into your project management tool or into Slack or whatever you're using to communicate what to implement. And these implementation instructions can be used with or without using the AVO developer tools to implement. So if you're just doing direct calls to Mixpanel or Amplitude or Segment or anything like that, you can do that based on these implementation instructions. Then the third step, if you are using and choose to use AVO functions, then you can generate code based on the definitions in AVO. So it's a function per event, and the name of the function is according to the name of the event. And those functions are type safe, so they help you stick to which type was defined in the tracking plan, and help you avoid any spelling mistakes or casing mistakes or anything like that. Then the next step is validation. So you validate that the implementation is according to the specs using various methods. We provide web and mobile debuggers for that. And there's also, if you're using a compiled language, then your app just won't compile if you're using AVO functions. And there's a bug in your implementation. And then we also provide this inspector, which is here on the left. And that is a way to get like a report on all the issues that are in either your existing tracking that is not implemented with AVO, or your tracking that is using to implement AVO, or both. So this kind of gives you a report and highlights any issues that are in your tracking, and you can also get alerts based on these issues. And then the next step is just analyzing the data in your analytics tool. So based on this workflow here, we're going to dig into each of these steps, and we're going to dig into defining kind of metrics, events, and all the different possibilities that are to configure along the way. So let's just jump into that. I want to also highlight again, like I did in the beginning, please feel free to jump into either the chat or the Q&A section. The Q&A section would be actually better, but you can also send me a chat message, that's fine. If you have any questions, and I would really appreciate it if there's anything that is unclear, that you would just stop me and ask a question in the chat, and I will answer the question when it's relevant during this session. All right, so these are the 8 things that we're going to be covering regarding designing good data in AVO. That's workspace configuration, importing and publishing, configuring sources and destinations, creating and configuring categories, configuring metrics, configuring events, configuring properties, and inspector. So a lot of configurations here. So the first thing is workspace configuration. And I'm not only going to show this in a slide, I'm also going to actually open the product and show you how to do this. So first, I'm going to show you kind of how to force approval for branches, configuring login methods, and configuring roles. So all of these here actions are only available for admins, but I want to share this with you in case you're an admin in your workspace. So the workspace configurations. So this is my demo tracking plan, the same as I showed in AVO Basics. So the workspace configurations, they are in here. So if you go into members and permission, then here is a list of all the members, and you can change the permissions for each of them. So if I wanted to downgrade Stefania, our CEO, to a view-only person, I could do that here, but that's only available for admins. And these are the 4 different roles that are available. Admin basically has access to everything and is able to merge branches, for example, without approvals. Editor, they have access to changing everything in the tracking plan. The only thing that they don't have access to is what is configurable here. So they don't have access to members, they don't have access to changing the workspace settings, and they don't have access to billing. That's the only difference. They can do everything else. Comment only, it's literally what it says. This user can only comment on events, properties, metrics, branches, or whatever. They're not able to change anything. They're not able to add any new events or change any events. View only, they only have access to the tracking plan to view it, and they don't even have access to change anything. No comment, I mean. Okay, and then there are the other permissions. So here is how you configure the authentication method. You actually, this is just information right now. So if you want to configure the authentication method, you would have to contact us and we will actually do it. But here are the different types of authentication methods. So there's email, password, or Google login. So everyone can just, log in however they want. But they also, if your organization wants to force everyone to use the Google login, then you can do that. That's what we call Google SSO. So it's just forced Google login, and that also offers you to kind of white label your domain. So if you wanted to let everyone in with the domain avo.app, then you could do that with this. The same with SAML, that the same possibility is like everything is possible as in with Google SSO, but this is just the SAML configuration, which is can be integrated with whatever SSO provider that you have that offers SAML. Then there is the protected main branch. So that is how you force branches to be approved before they are merged. So I have this off, then everyone can merge branches without anyone reviewing them ever. But if I turn this on, then every branch has to get an approval from someone else than me. It just has to be some coworker that approves it. It just has to be someone else than me that does that. So configuring login method, force approval, configuring roles. Yeah, that was what I was going to talk about this. Feel free to drop in questions if you have any. Then importing and publishing. So this, okay. So the topics that I'm going to talk about here is how to import your tracking plan into Avo, how to set up a publishing integration, how to publish, and also where you can export from and publish to. So importing, it can both be useful for teams that are just starting out with Avo and want to import their taxonomy into Avo, or it can also be useful for teams that are gradually adopting Avo and they don't want to import their whole taxonomy at the same time. They are just maybe doing it in chunks. So maybe it is an existing, or like a customer that is already onboarded. So it's relevant for everyone. So how to import, you go in here, and here's like an import button. And here, if you have a CSV of that you can, that is exported from either Amplitude, Mixpanel, or is on the Google Sheet format that we support, you just drop it here, and then you can pick events and properties that you want to include. I actually was going to have a CSV prepared, but I seem to have maybe forgotten to prepare it. So I won't do that live here now, but you can look at the docs here and see how importing works. Yeah, let's look at the docs maybe. So here are all the kind of instructions on how to import from Amplitude, how to import from Mixpanel, how to import from Google Sheet. And here's a link to our supported format. Here's like an example sheet. And it looks like this here. So this is kind of a template that you can just export and import into Avo. Okay, no, that was not the window that was going to open. Yes, and then publishing. So that's super related because you could import into Avo, and then you could just make minor changes and then export directly. And that means, not export, publish directly. And that means all, like, let's say you import a bunch of events into Avo and none of them have descriptions. And then you add descriptions to all the events and then you publish them. Then all the descriptions are going to be included in when you publish to Amplitude Govern, to Mixpanel Lexicon, segment protocols. And if you have a webhook that you want to use your data for, or your taxonomy for, you can do that. So these are the different types of integrations that you can publish to. And when you want to add a new integration, let's just add the Mixpanel Lexicon one. Test. Create that. I'll switch to a branch. New branch. Data design. Deep dive. Then you just follow the instructions that are available for publishing on how to find your Mixpanel project ID, Mixpanel service account username, and your secret. And then you can filter on which events you want to publish. So if I don't want to publish my entire taxonomy, only the events that I'm sending to Mixpanel, that would make sense, right? Then I can just filter on that. Then you can see here also all the events that are going to be published. Then I can enable or disable auto-publishing. So if you have this on, then whenever you merge a branch to the main branch, then like the publishing will be triggered automatically when the branch is merged. So that the destination of your publishing will be in sync with the main branch. So this is really useful if you want to have the descriptions and available in Mixpanel lexicon at all times, or if you want to use the ability that all of these destinations have, amplitude, Mixpanel, and segment, to kind of allow only events that are defined in AVO. So when you publish, then what you're telling Mixpanel lexicon is that all of these events have been defined in AVO and they are okay. You can let them in. All other events will be blocked by Mixpanel lexicon. So that's really useful as well. Let's see if I covered everything. How to publish, where you can export from and publish to. Yep, that is all. Then configuring sources and destinations. So what's that? Which sources and destinations should be connected? What events are sent from the source? Implement with AVO or not on this source, and include destination by default or not. So here are the kind of different configurations that I'm going to go through with you about sources and destinations. So here's connections. Here are all the connections that I have defined here. So let's just add a new source here. Let's say we're adding a backend. And my backend is written in Python 3, since Python 2 is deprecated. I'll create that. So now I've defined the development platform and programming language, and then we want to send the event or the events to be sent to some destinations. So I only want to send the events from backend to my custom analytics API, maybe. And I want to send this event from backend, so I can define that here from the source point of view. And I don't want it to be implemented with AVO. Here I can check if I want it to be implemented with AVO or not. If we look at the destination, a source that has maybe more configurations, so here you can just configure on the source level which events should be sent. So if you want to, add all events to this source, then you don't have to go into each event and add the source. You can just do that from the source level, which can be handy. Also for this, so if you wanted to disable all events on this source, I don't want to implement them with AVO, then you can do that from here instead of having to go into every event and uncheck that from the source. All right, destinations. For the destinations, there's just a destination name and the type, and then the API keys. If AVO is managing your SDK, then you would add the API keys here. If you were using a custom destination, then you don't really need these because you're managing the SDK yourself. Then here you can, like in the sources, you can configure which sources and destinations this should be sent from. And here is also really interesting because here I can set whether this destination should be included by default when the source is added to an event. So if I have this as disabled, then when I add these sources to an event, then by default, the event will not be sent to my custom analytics API. But if I have it on, then by default, all these sources will send the event to my custom analytics API. It's maybe good to also see it from the event view, how that looks. For example, here you can see that from the web source, we have configured Intercom, Braze, and Facebook Analytics to be not included by default. So I have to opt in to sending to that. So it's like, we don't want all our events to go to Intercom. We only want selected ones. So we don't include it by default. Yep. Okay, I've covered all of that. Let me know if you have any questions. Then creating and configuring categories. So I was going to talk to you a little bit about the category description use cases, adding metrics, adding events, and category view for events. So I'm always opening the wrong window. Let's put this one in front. So creating a new category, we do that here from the events view. So I do add category. I want to add a demo category and create. And then I get this category view. So this category view can have a description, and I actually have a use case for the description here. So for example, what I have started doing, because we use this method of defining what to track, we use this method called purpose meetings, or we have these purpose meetings to decide what to track. So we gather all the stakeholders for that feature, all the like a developer, a product person, a data person, and a designer, and just all the different stakeholders, main stakeholders in the feature, and we decide how to measure success for that feature. And if you would like to what is it called? Document the results of a meeting like that, or document if you have a, want to document just how to measure success, you can do that on the category basis per feature. So for example, here we have gameplay, we have this purpose meeting on July 18th, and here's the topic, the problem that we're solving, the goals, and then you add your metrics. So, oh, sorry about that. So I can document purpose meeting here. And then I can add my metrics. I want to add my sign up metric, and I want to add my message conversion funnel. And I also want to add my sign up events, sign up start, sign up complete. Got a question? So I will know whether an event is happening on the web or app, and to fire the event to a custom analytics or other destination. So great question. Happening on the web. Okay, so this is a great question, because we only know that if you're using the AVO functions. So if you're using the AVO functions, then we kind of create code for you based on the source. So we create or create or generate code from the events that are supposed to be sent from web, for example. And in those event functions, or AVO functions, like we call them, there is a call to each of the destinations. But if you're not using AVO functions, then this is purely for documentation purposes. Great. Answer live then. Okay, cool. Great question. Keep them coming. Okay. Category description, user gated, other method, category view for events. Exactly. So then another thing I wanted to highlight here about categories, you can either have your events list kind of organized by category, or you can just have it like a simple list, which is alphabetically ordered. So that is another thing about categories that I wanted to share with you. Okay. Configuring metrics. I wanted to share with you metric types and use case for metrics. So let's go into metrics and just look at the sign-up funnel here. So here are the metric types that we offer. Funnel, that's typically used for, like it says, a funnel. So if you're like documenting a journey, like a sign-up funnel or like a checkout funnel or something like that, then this is great to document which steps are like important steps in that journey. So here, for example, we have 4 events in this journey here. Another metric is segmentation, which is great when you want to just see like how many active users per week, or how many active users segmented by a device. So you want to see active users segmented by iOS, Android, and web. Then that is a good metric to use, because on segmentation you have this group by functionality. So you can group by a property. Let's group by product type, for example. Yes, I want to add it. So group by product type here. So that's really handy. Let's just remove these because this doesn't really make sense. So this would be how you would visualize the event in Mixpanel or Amplitude, for example. Then we have retention. Then you select your born event, for example, sign up start, and then return event is maybe message sent. So this is how you would structure your retention in Amplitude Mixpanel. Then proportion. So if I wanted to know how many people are, remove event. So message sent divided by session started. So the proportion of users that log into my application, the proportion of them, how many are sending a message, then this is a useful type of metric. Metric use cases, I wanted to share that with you a little bit. So defining a metric, yeah. So there are different use cases than just purely documenting metrics. Oops, here. So of course, the most obvious use case is to have like a universal source of truth of how you define a metric. So the sign-up funnel, it has these 4 events, and there's no doubt about it, and everyone defines it the same way. Also, another good thing about documenting metrics is that they are here in the event view. Oh, there are no metrics on this event. Let's find them. Let me see. Session start, maybe? Yes. So you see the related metrics in context of the event. So this really helps both communicate the importance of this event, or even like if I was going in and I wanted to change something in this event, it would help me understand like, okay, I probably need to talk to this person because this is a really important metric for us. So I just want to make sure that if I change it, then nothing happens. Another great thing about metrics is that it helps you define what to track. So usually, and I will talk about this in the best practices later, usually we recommend doing that first, because like defining the metric first, because otherwise you might end up with a lot of data that is not answering any questions. So you have a lot of irrelevant data. You want your data to be relevant. So that's kind of one of the tools that we provide to help you. Okay, here are the events that I need to answer this question, and here are the properties that I need to answer this question. So you're not filling your taxonomy with a bunch of events that you don't really need. Metric types, use cases for metrics. I think that's it, what I was going to talk about. Then we're at configuring events. Let's talk about that. There are a lot of configurations of events. And let's just create an event from scratch, I think. So I'm going to add here checkout complete. Let's use the consistent casing. So this is another helpful tool that Avo provides, is that it provides these suggestions. Also, it helps me not create duplicate events. For example, if I would do update email, it will say here, try update email for consistent casing, and also similar to email update. So it's highlighting, hey, you have a really similar event, just the words switch. So it's kind of warning me not to create that one. So, but I'm going to do the checkout complete. I'm going to use the correct casing or the consistent casing. And we're going to create a description. And like I mentioned in the Avo basics, I really recommend being careful about the description and being specific about when the event should be sent. For example, for checkout complete, the moment that someone clicks the checkout complete checkout button and to the checkout being actually complete, there are a lot of things that can happen in between. For example, your credit card could be declined. So the checkout is not actually complete. So it's really important to communicate this to everyone that is going to implement on each product, on each platform, such that there is no discrepancy between there. So event sent when the user successfully completes checkout. So now there's no doubt about it. No matter what the moment is, if you want it to be the button, then just be really clear about it should be the button. Then I will add a source. And here, again, implement with Avo. This is a way to say whether this event should be implemented with Avo functions or either without Avo function or purely just documentation. Usually when teams are getting started, they import their entire tracking plan and they just uncheck implement with Avo for all of the events because they just want it for documentation. And then they perhaps implement the events step by step, just take 3 or 5 events at a time to implement. Then the destinations, so we talked about this a little bit before from the source point of view. So, or from the destination point of view. So here is how we can configure which destinations this event should be sent to from this source. So this is per source. So from web, all of these events, this event should be sent to Custom Analytics API, Amplitude, and Mixpanel. But from desktop, we want to also include Intercom, maybe. Okay. Then there are the properties or the actions, actually. So we have these different actions here. So there is the log event action, which is by default on all of the events, because that's the by far most common use case is to log an event when you have an event in Avo. So that means that you're doing amplitude.track or mixpanel.log event or whatever the calls are, and you have event properties on those events. But if you wanted also to update some user properties, so for example, I want to add the user property number of purchases to this event. Well, let's use the right casing. So I want to know how many times this user has completed the checkout. So this will always increment whenever I send this event. Then you can do that. So you add the update user properties action to the event. Then what will happen is that first this user property will be updated. Then the log event action happens. So the event will be sent with all the properties that are defined right here. The other actions, identify user and unidentify user, this usually happens, like the identify user action usually happens when either a user signs up or logs in. So when an account is created or when they log in using their account. Unidentified user usually happens when a user logs out. Log revenue, that happens with the purchase. So it will be really make sense to have log revenue with this event because it's a checkout event. And then we have the last one, which is page view, log page view. This is only supported by Segment. So what this does is that in addition, or if you only have the log page view action on, then it will just log a page view in Segment, which is kind of what, for example, Google Analytics uses for page views. And if you just wanted to specifically log a page view for this event, then you can do that here. So kind of these actions represent what will happen when this event is triggered. So this is the sequence of things that happen. The user properties are updated, the event is logged, the revenue is logged. And you can remove, if you don't want to log an event, you can remove that and only update user properties and log revenue. Then it's not really an event per se, but still you have a call in your code that is performing these actions, and you can configure that like that. Yes, I'm not done here. Then the category. So here from the event view, I can also add this to a category. So I'll just add this to my demo category here, and then I can add tags. And the tags are really flexible, and you can just use them for whatever you want. But it's really handy to use tags if you want to kind of filter your tracking plan in some way. Some teams use this to kind of assign ownership on events. So like the core experience team that owns this event. And then they can filter on their tag to see which events are theirs. Some teams use this to like add countries. So if they have specific countries that they're serving and not all of the events are relevant for all of the countries, then they can do that. And yeah, whatever you want to use them for. And then here's a commenting that you can do on the event level. I think, oh, name mapping, that's the last thing. So the last thing I wanted to talk about with events is name mapping. So if there is like a specific way that this event name needs to be for a specific destination, for example, these marketing platforms like Facebook Analytics and stuff like that, they have a specific way that the event needs to be named, and that does not necessarily comply to your naming convention. So then you have an option of mapping the name of the event to that destination as whatever you need it to be. So if this needed to be like purchase for intercom, then this is how you can do that. So now this event will always be sent as checkout complete, or the event name will always be checkout complete, except for intercom, it will be sent as purchase. Okay, configuring properties. Let's just look at an existing properties. I'm going to go into the property view, maybe go into product type. That's my favorite property here. So here are all the configurations that you can do to the properties. So it has a description and it also has types, and this type determines this type is what it will be validated against. So it will be validated in either if you're using Java functions or if you're using the inspector to validate your data, then this is the type that it will be validated against. If you select list here, then it will just be a list of strings or an array of strings, a list of integers, and so on. Here is a really important part. This is, let's put it on another event, sign up complete as well. So this is a way to define the presence of the property down to event and down to a source. So when I say presence, then I mean whether the property should be required or optional for these events. So should it always be sent? Now all of the this property should be always sent to sign up complete and sign up start. So it's required in both. Or if it should be sometimes sent, optional on these events, or if it's depending on source. So then I can just configure my entire matrix. It should be always sent here. It should be sometimes sent here. Never sent on Android. Android does never send product type, it's sign up complete, and always here. So this is like a super flexible way of defining the presence of the property on the event. The same for the property values. That's only available down to a source now, not to an event. So here, for example, if Android, it does not sell mugs and umbrellas, then you can just uncheck that. And if iOS only sells mugs and umbrellas, then you can uncheck hoodie. So this is basically saying which property values are allowed on this property for each of these sources. I wanted to maybe show you also another type of a property, an integer. So here is another type of constraints. So it's not literally what numbers are allowed, like in strings, but it's a minimum and maximum. So let's say we had a property that is a percentage, then it's really handy to have like the minimum should be 0 and the maximum 1. So that allows us to validate that, you know, not one platform is sending 0.23 or 23% and another platform is sending 23, but everyone is just between 0 and 1. This also has name mapping. So if the property needed to be sent as something specific to a specific destination, you can do that here. Creating a property group, that's what I have left. Property groups, they are super handy. So I can create a property group and I want to create a property group for, okay, I don't have any messages, maybe, yes, messages. Then I have a property group and then I can add all my message properties here. And then whenever I want to add message properties to an event, then I can just add the whole group instead of having to go through all the message properties that I want to add and remember them. Also, if the name of some of the properties that I want to, let's say we wanted this one, it's not like doesn't have the word message in it, then it's super nice to be able to just add all of this group because I don't have to remember all of the properties that should go together when we are measuring something about messages. All right. Property groups, name, constraint, yep. Okay, then there is the inspector. That's the last related to the Avo product that I'm going to go through. Then I'm going to talk briefly about best practices. Unfortunately, I probably don't have time to dig into it a lot because I only scheduled an hour for this session, but we'll see how far we can go. So inspector, 4 things that I want to talk about here: how does inspector work, how to read the inspector dashboard, how to set up Slack alerts, and what does inspector alert on. So how does it work in the first place? So how the inspector is your data observability part of Avo. So what the inspector does is that it listens to all the events that are sent either from, you know, direct calls made to Mixpanel, Amplitude, Segment, whatever you're using. You can listen to that, or the events that they're sending using Avo functions. And this creates a dashboard which surfaces issues in your tracking. So here is the report for the inspector. So here we see all the events that have been sent in the last 30 days in my development environment. We also have reports for staging and production, and you can, depending on your subscription, you can narrow down the window. So the most important things to notice in the inspector is this book mark here. If that is missing, then it means that your event has not defined in the tracking plan, which means it might be an unexpected event, and you would get an alert when an unexpected event appears in the inspector in production. Another thing to note are these red dots here, and they are really screaming at you, so it's really difficult to ignore them. So these red dots, sorry, I have a question. How can this happen? Can you be a little bit more specific? Oh, how can it happen that an unexpected event is sent? So yeah, exactly. So this can happen, for example, if a team is migrating from using direct calls to, let's say, Mixpanel, they're migrating from that to using AVO functions. And not all of the teams have started using AVO functions, and someone maybe accidentally doesn't know about the procedure, and they implement in the old way, and then they don't go into AVO and define it there first. Then that can happen that way. Another way is if you choose not to use AVO functions, then you can, of course, make mistakes in the event names, for example. So for example, here's experiment exposure that has been defined in the tracking plan. And then let's say this team is not using AVO functions to implement. They are just using AVO to define the events, and then using the implementation instructions to implement using direct calls to Mixpanel. Then, of course, it's possible to make mistakes in the implementation. So then you would get experiment exposure that is not defined in the tracking plan or in a different spelling. So this is catching those instances. Yeah, so I have another question here. So how are we tracking the event volume? It's clear for the AVO function, but if you fire directly, how can you get the event volume? So what you do when you enable the inspector is that you install an SDK, and that SDK is installed into each of your sources, so your web source, iOS source, Android source, and so on. And that is kind of the first step to get validation. So you install that SDK, and usually teams have like a central call site for their events, and you just insert like 2 lines of code from AVO into that central call site, deploy it into production, and then AVO is listening to all the events that you're also sending to other destinations. I hope that answered your question. Enter live, done. Okay, let's look at some issues. For example, here on reaction added. So I can expand here and see all the properties and if they are also defined in tracking plan or not. And I can see the issues that are on these properties. So for example, if I look at the channel privacy type here on the reaction added property, then I can see that it's sometimes missing. So it's missing in 46% of event volume. And because it's defined in my tracking plan and it's defined to be required, then this is a problem. It should be present in 100% of the event calls. And you can also look at which versions this happened in. We are not sending a version in this demo tracking plan, but normally we recommend sending the version so you can see if the issue has been fixed or not. Then also we can see here is a conflict with the tracking plan. So the tracking plan expects an integer, but it's sent as a string. So that is an issue as well. The types of issues, let's see here. No, it's Slack alerts. So here are the type of issues that are alerted on. So property is sometimes not provided. property is sent with inconsistent type, a new event seen that's not in the tracking plan, new property that is seen that is not in the tracking plan, and property does not match the tracking plan. So these are the alerts that are currently available for the inspector, and these are also the issues that you will see in the inspector. Okay, how to set a Slack alert in the waters. Yeah, I just said that. The inspector will be able to identify in-page implementation plus Google Tag Manager implementation plus Avo implementation. Google Tag Manager implementation, that is a great question. So yes, with in-page implementation. So when you have direct calls in your code for any to sending to Mixpanel or Amplitude or whatever you're sending. And yes, for our implementation, Google Tag Manager implementation, that is kind of a conversation that we would have to have specifically, because we don't have like a direct integration with Google Tag Manager. But there are perhaps some ways of doing that, but I'm not sure about how to go about that. Yeah, we haven't done that before, I think. Okay, clear. Thank you. So I was going to talk about, yes, how to set up inspector alerts. So to set up alerts, it's going to be here. Then you go here into manage sources and you click here connect to Slack, and you have to go through, of course, the authentication process and everything, and then you connect it to a Slack channel. So then you would get the alerts to this Slack channel about all the new issues that come in on production. We're almost out of time, and I haven't talked about recommendations and best practices. So in my last data design deep dive session, I talked about this a lot. So if you want to go into details about that, you can go into our training page, avo.app/training. And here is that session here, the data design deep dive. I talk a lot about best practices there. I chose to flip it now because I wasn't able to go through the kind of configuration part well enough the last time. So yeah, so I flipped it.